Hey there, Bixby developers. Today, we'll be continuing with part 2 of the Result View tutorial remake for 2021. Now, why am I remaking this? It's because there have been a ton of changes to Bixby Studio since the first version of this tutorial. And with all those changes means a lot of changes in the development process and new features as well. So in case you're wondering why this is part 2, a link to part 1 will be in the description below, and I highly recommend you starting from part 1 before starting this tutorial. So let's go ahead and see where we left off.
Here's what I found.
We can see here that we have this list of pets right here as indicated by the code on the left, which displays one of these summary cards for each individual pet. After clicking on any of these pets, you can see that it is simply showing us just an image of the pet. But we have a lot of the pet's actual information that we can display for the user as well to create a much more interesting and engaging capsule. So the first thing we're going to have to do is to extrapolate the pet details page, which is the page after you click on one of the pets, into its own layout macro. And we're going to do that by copying this and replacing this section content image portion with a layout macro. This one will be called the pet details. Now Bixby is going to scream at us saying, hey, there's no pet details yet. So why don't we go ahead and make that by right-clicking and doing a new layout file. And this one will be the pet details.layout. And we're going to delete all this and make this a layout macro def that is named the pet details. And just like the last one, we're going to need params for this. And we're going to be passing in the pet as a type of pet, and this will be required. And finally, we will only require one of them. And next, we actually need some content for this. Here we have content section content. And we can just add that image back in really quick, which had an aspect ratio. And we want the image to cover the entire square. And finally, we use the syntax in order to refer to the URL inside of it. And over here, we actually need to pass in pets instead of just pet. That was a mistake there. And let's see if it works.
Here's what I found.
It's working, right? So this is in the layout macro def. So because some pets have one image and other pets have multiple images, when we look at, for example, our pets object, we can see that here, this one has images. So Moxie actually has more than one image, and she also has the option for a single image as well. Whereas for the next cat right underneath Moxie, we have just a single image. So in order to, I guess, have the option to display all the images, we can use a simple if clause. And in this case, we just need to check to see if pets.images exists. And if it does exist, we can insert an image carousel. Ooh, very fancy. Just click insert. We're going to add an image background color as well as an object fit to cover the entire square. Now it's also important that when you pass this stuff in, right? So let's actually change this to the proper reference. And now when we run this,
here's what I found.
And we go to Moxie page, we can see that we have the image carousel as well as the image underneath that, but we just need to add a simple else clause and wrap that image right there. So that way, both of these images don't show up, right?
Here's what I found.
And there we go. Now we just have the image carousel for Moxie. But if we look at, for example, Colonel Whiskers,
here's what I found.
We can see that Colonel Whiskers does not have the image carousel because Colonel Whiskers only has a single image. Okay, and the next thing we're going to add is an HBox that contains a lot of the pet's statistics. So what we can do is we can insert this also from the component gallery. And why don't we actually use this one? And we can just click insert. So now that we have this, we're going to change this one to a title S. And we're going to put the cat's name here, or the pet's name here. And I guess we don't necessarily need these, but we can leave them for now. And over here, in case you guys remember from the original capsule, we have a little icon of the type of pet that you're looking at. So here we can have shape circle with a style title S, and the URL will be indicated with the pet species -icon.png. So this way you'll be able to basically refer to whatever kind of species it is, and if there's an icon associated with it, for example a cat icon or a dog icon, then it will just figure it out on its own. Let's go ahead and take a look at how that looks.
Here are 7 pets. Here's what I found.
And there we go. We can see that that's what it looks like. And I'm going to change this to the Note 20 because I think that the Note 20 has kind of some better resolution for this. And after this HBox, we actually had another HBox that happens after a divider. And the HBox, we're going to manually do this one as content, and inside the content of the HBox, there are a bunch of VBoxes. And for the first one on the left, we're going to want it to align at the beginning. And inside the VBox, there's also content, and we're going to want to add some text. So when you add text into this content, basically the things that you add in here will be one after the other. And we can just copy paste this and move this down. And in this case, we just need to refer to the pet's actual height, which in the pet object is value pet.height. And it's also in inches as well. And also make this a detail L, so that way the text looks a little bit more dynamic. And let's go ahead and take a look.
Here's what I found.
There we go. And I guess what I meant to say was that, I think earlier I said they appear side by side. No, they appear on top of each other like that. So, all right, let's add another VBox. We can just copy and paste this one. And we can just change this to weight. But of course, in the JavaScript, it is camel cased, and it is also in pounds. All right, and this one also has to be centered. And there were 4 stats that we wanted to show. The next one will be age, where we can just copy and paste. And the last one will be gender of the pet, which will align at the end. And there we go. So that should finish off this HBox, and there are 4 VBoxes inside of it.
Here's what I found.
And it's looking pretty good. So we have the height, weight, age, and gender all very nicely organized in our view. That is the power of HBoxes, and I highly recommend giving them a try, especially when you have information like this to display to the user. All right, and we're going to add another divider, and a new component that we haven't used yet in this video is a spacer. The spacer adds a little bit of extra space in between multiple components. For example, in this case, in between the divider and whatever comes after that divider. This can help, organize the stuff in your UI a little bit better. And in this case, we're going to do this for the biography. We're going to add a little bit of space in between the divider and the biography. And after this single line, we're going to add a paragraph, title pet.bio. And the style will be detail L.
I found. Here's what I found.
There we go. So we can just see that this has Moxie's biography right here. Looking pretty good in my opinion. And we can also see the extra space that the spacer provides in between this divider and the next component after it, which is the biography. And the next thing we're going to add is the pet's interests. So not every pet has their interests available, so we can instead do if exists pet.interests, which checks to see if the pet has their interests. And we do a spacer and a divider as well as a spacer after that. And finally, a single line that's going to look very similar to the previous one with detail L-soft that says interests. Now it's worth noting that the soft here for the styling makes the text a little bit darker in this case. You can see here how it's still the same size as this detail L, but it is a bit darker. This way, it kind of draws attention away from this word specifically, but you know what you're reading, right? So it's for some UI purposes. Anyway, the way that we're going to display the pet's interests is actually with a lesser known component called the partitioned. And the partitioned actually isn't in the component gallery, so we have to type it out. But this works very similarly to the previous loop that we made. And what it does is that it loops through each of the interests and then displays something for that interest. And why don't we go ahead and see if that actually worked? But what we're trying to do is we're trying to display a line of text
I found these
per
7.
interest.
Here's what I found.
And yes, it did work. So now we can see that this partitioned did indeed display, and it is showing each of Moxie's interests one after the other. All right, and while we're still in this if block, we can add a spacer right here, and then finally add a divider outside of the if block, so that way it separates this thing from the next element after this. That about wraps it up for part 2 of this result view tutorial. We're going to finish up the capsule in part 3, where we add the last few remaining components to this view, and then we finally also add the dialogue as well as the conversation driver, which all do affect the result view. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful and a nice review on building result views for Bixby. Part 3 will be coming out soon, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And yeah, that's it.